faith, a little trust in him, and soon we're singing and dancing. Give me Aleph, Emunah. Give me a base for Bitochen. Give me Gimel, Geulah. Emunah, Bitochen, Geulah. Give me Aleph, Emunah. Base, Bitochen. Give me Gimel, Geulah. Geulah, be this Rosh Hashanah. I'll be Gimel.
Good evening! How are you doing, my holy sisters and brothers? Our spirits are high. We're making a siyum on Tractate Beitzah today, the 8th volume of the Talmud, the laws of festivals. Today is page 40, the final page. We'll be making a l'chaim with my favorite bourbon. I think Nina will come into the office and join us. We'll also say a bracha, a mizonos bracha, eating a few Ritz crackers, and we'll be able to, put this tractate behind us, and we'll say our prayer that what we've learned will stay with us, and then we'll open the next tractate, just the first few lines of Tractate Rosh Hashanah. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on a Sunday evening as we get together to make a siyum? Paula in Chicago, Yehudit in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Nancy in North Carolina, Bill in Missouri, Christo in Lubbock, John in Sedona, Renee in Indiana, Patrice in Utah, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Dorothy in Pittsburgh, Paul in the Great Northwest, Shahar in Tabasco de Mexico. Bienvenido, Shahar. Chaim says, Chaim in Charlotte, giving us a big mazel tov. And in Utah, shalom, shalom. Love you both, and we love you, Anne. Great to have you with us. Wait, it skipped on me. Where'd it go? There we go. We got that. Christo, looking very good, Mr. Sal. Always happy to hear from you. And Nina, thank you so much. Paula says shalom. And Anne says thank you over there on the YouTube side. Seraphim with us in Sacramento. It's so good to be together. Let's just get right to it. There's a lot to do on a siyum day. So let's get into it. We're on page 40. We're starting right at the very bottom of page 39 on the B side. With Mishna number 6 here in chapter 5. We'll be covering Mishnas 6 and 7, the final Mishnas of chapter 5, which is the final chapter, of course, of Tractate Beitzah. Mishnah 6. With regard to one who had produce in a different city beyond the Shabbos limit, and the residents of that city where the produce was located joined the Shabbat boundaries, enabling them to reach the owner's home on the festival, and they wish to bring him some of his produce, they may not bring it to him. His produce is as his feet, and since it was outside his Shabbos limit, it may not be taken from its place. So, this is this applies to so much of what we've been talking about with Shabbos boundaries. Right, so basically imagine that this guy who is the owner of this produce, this is his house, and this is his Shabbos limit, right? So they're in an area out in the countryside, and there's no community Erev, no neighborhood Erev, nothing like a citywide Erev. Not citywide, but so much of LA is in the LA Erev. But it's just his regular Shabbos Techum, his boundary. So 2,000 cubits in every direction from his house. And then he has some produce deposited over here in another location that is outside his boundary, right? So he can't get to it on Shabbos or on a festival because the Shabbos boundaries also apply on a festival. You can only walk 2,000 cubits from your house and in any direction. That's why the circle. Okay, but if he makes a joining of his boundaries, in other words, if he deposits some food, like a loaf of bread and something else, we studied in Tractate Eruvin what the minimum deposit is, but basically some food that would constitute a meal, and he deposited in a safe location here. Okay, so now he would have the boundary of the 2,000 cubits in every direction around that deposit. So now it would be this dotted circle, right? And now, since his Shabbos dwelling is where his food is deposited, he wouldn't be able to walk in that direction at all. But he could walk this way to his food deposit. That's his Shabbos dwelling now. And he could continue to walk to that other place where he stored this produce. And what they're talking about is, so he wants access to that produce during the festival. This is just one meal. This is like, a whole storeroom with a whole bunch of produce in it. And maybe he's going to need that because he's hosting a big party, and it would be useful to him to have, this bucket of figs or a bucket of olives or whatever it is, like some large amount of produce. So if he established this Erev, okay, so he could walk to his Erev and he could continue walking to the place where his produce is deposited. And likewise, people who live over here where his produce is deposited could bring that produce to his house. Why? Because his produce, he's the owner of it, is now within a Shabbos boundary that includes both his house and the storeroom. Now, what the Mishna is saying is, let's say he didn't do that. He didn't change his Shabbos dwelling. He didn't make a food deposit right here. So this is his Shabbos boundary. Now, the people who live over here, let's say they did establish an Erev. They put some food over here. So they would have the possibility of transporting something from here to there as far as boundaries are concerned. But if he's the owner of this produce, then his produce, okay, that it is as his feet, right? So his produce has the same Shabbos limits as he does. That produce is outside his Shabbos limit, and so as far as he's concerned, it can't be moved at all. It cannot be moved, even though it lies within the Shabbos boundaries of these other people who change their dwelling by depositing some minimal amount of food here. They cannot transport it for him. They can take that walk all the way to his house, but they can't carry his stuff because it's his stuff. But if he transferred ownership of what's in his storeroom to these people before the festival started, and they moved their Shabbos boundary by depositing some food over here, then they could transport that food for him, but only if there was that transfer of ownership before the festival started. So that's what we're talking about here, right? So that's what we just said. His produce is as his feet. Since it is outside of his Shabbos limit, it may not be taken from its place. However, if the owner placed an Erev to enable travel to that city, if he placed his Erev right here, then the legal status of his produce is like his status with regard to the Shabbos limit. And so if he moved his Shabbos dwelling by placing that Erev, now he has access to the storeroom, and the produce in his storeroom has access to him, as it were. Now, with regard to one who invited guests to visit him from a town beyond his Shabbos limit, and they joined the Shabbos boundaries, right? So he invited people from over here to come and visit him. They are beyond his limit. And they would be beyond their own limit, except that they changed their dwelling to here, and that's why his house is accessible to them with the Shabbos limit of that dotted line. So he invited guests to visit him from a town beyond his Shabbos limit, and they joined the Shabbos boundaries to enable them to reach his house. They deposited some food here. So they may not carry in their hands back to their town any portions that they received from him as gifts, right? So when they walk over to him, he might give them some food, maybe even some leftovers, maybe even some beautiful food that he wants them to take back to their house so that they could enjoy it for the next meal with their friends. But any food that's at his house even though it's within their limit, the limit of these people, since they changed their dwelling by putting some food over here, food that started the festival in his possession remained, it keeps the same boundaries as him. Since he didn't change his boundaries, any food that he has the same boundaries as him. And even though he gives it to them during the festival, they're not going to be able to bring it home. That also answers the question that Bill asked yesterday, right? If the woman, who borrowed water and salt to make bread during the festival, if the one who lent her the water and salt just freely gave it to her, not alone, but just gave it to her, could it be nullified in the bread and it would have the same boundaries as the woman who baked it? And the answer is no, because when the festival started, that water and salt had the same boundaries as the lender, the woman who lent them. And so same exact situation here. They may not carry in their hands back to their town any portions they receive from him as gifts. These portions are as the feet of the host, since they belonged to him before the festival began. And this is true unless he transferred ownership of their portions to them on the eve of the festival, meaning before the festival started, in which case the gifts may be carried to them. So if he was going to give them portions that they could carry back, they've adjusted their Shabbos boundary by making this the center of their boundary. He told them before the festival started, I give you ownership of these portions that I want you to take home with you. Then when they come for lunch, they can bring these portions home with them and serve it to their own guests that night at dinner. That is Mishnah number 6. Let's go to the Gemara on this Mishnah. It is stated that Amoraim disagreed with regard to one who deposits produce with another for safekeeping. Right? So we had the case of there was, he had some portions that they were his own and they weren't going to be able to take it home to their house because it belonged to him before the festival started. And there was the case of, I freely give you these portions, and he said that to them before the festival started. So the fact that it's stored in his house doesn't matter. It belongs to them, and they're going to be able to take it home. So, possession is 9/10 of the law, right? So who owns these gifts and where are they located? These are the relevant questions. Now we're going to add a new nuance to this in the Gemara. Okay, one thing is I own these things and they're in my house. Another is I own these things and they're at another location outside my Shabbos boundary. Another case is they're in my house, I own them, but before the festival started, I freely give it to you. It happens to be stored in my house, but it belongs to you. What if you are the owner and you're storing some stuff in my house, but what is the nature of that relationship? Why are you storing some of your property in my house? Did I borrow it from you for my benefit? Or did you deposit it with me for your benefit? You needed to put it in a safe place and you thought that it would be safe if you left it in my courtyard, safer than in your courtyard. I don't know, maybe you've had a problem with thieves in your neighborhood. I have a higher fence, more security. I have German shepherds in my backyard. Maybe I have a security force and it's going to be safer in my yard. Okay, so you feel better if it's in my yard. So you ask me, can I store some stuff in your yard because it's safer? Okay, who benefits from that? You do. Who's responsible if something goes wrong with the stuff that is stored in my yard because you think it's more secure there? If after all that it gets stolen anyway from my yard, who bears the loss? You or me? I'm doing you a favor by storing it in my higher security yard. So what would make sense is that you would bear the loss. On the other hand, what if I said to you, my yard is more secure, but I can't just have everybody deposit their stuff in my yard. If you want to put stuff in my yard, I'm going to charge you $10. Okay, now I'm making money by allowing you to store some stuff in my yard, so it's for my benefit. So now we would think that I would bear the loss. If it gets stolen, I would have to make you whole because it got stolen while it was in my possession, in my safekeeping. These kinds of questions, now we're going to look at how the law of caretakers and guardian and borrower and lender, etc., how this intersects with the idea of ownership for the purpose of a Shabbos boundary and where that stuff can move on a festival, according to whose possession it's really in, is going to determine how far it can go. Is it going to be as my feet and it's going to have my Shabbos boundaries, or is it going to be as your feet and have your Shabbos boundaries, even though it's stored in my yard? That's the issue. Gemara. It is stated that that Amoraim, the rabbis of the Gemara, disagreed with regard to one who deposits produce with another for safekeeping. In whose possession is the produce with regard to determining its place of rest over the festival? Rav and Shmuel are going to disagree. Rav said they are as the feet of the one with whom they were deposited, the caretaker, right? If it's deposited with me for safekeeping, then I, the caretaker, that stuff in my yard is going to have the same boundary as I do. And Shmuel said they are as the feet of the object's owner. You wanted it in my yard for safekeeping, so it should have your boundaries. It's not in your possession, but it still is going to have your boundaries according to where you are on Shabbos. And if in my house is outside your Shabbos boundary, then that means it can't be moved at all. And Shmuel said they are as the feet of the object's owner. And the Gemara suggests, let us say that Rav and Shmuel follow their usual line of reasoning. As we learned in a Mishnah, if one brought in his produce or his ox to another person's courtyard with his permission, then the owner of the courtyard is liable for any damage caused to them, right? To the produce or to the ox. If they get damaged while they're in my house, I'm going to be liable for them because I gave permission for it to be stored there. That's according to this Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said the homeowner is never liable for damages unless the homeowner explicitly accepts upon himself the responsibility to watch them. I may have given you permission to store your stuff in my yard, but I did not accept liability. I did not accept legal responsibility in case your produce or your ox gets damaged while they are in my yard. And if I didn't explicitly accept that liability, I don't have that liability. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. But the rabbis who disagree with him say, if I gave permission for it to be stored in my yard, I am going to be responsible for anything that happens to them. And Rav Huna said that Rav said, the law, the halacha, is in accordance with the statement of the rabbis, the majority who disagreed with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And Shmuel said the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Okay, so Rav and Shmuel are going to recapitulate this same debate that was between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. If so, let us say that Rav spoke here in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, with the following reasoning. Just as when one gives permission to store something in his yard, that object is under his jurisdiction concerning monetary responsibility, so too it is in his jurisdiction concerning the establishment of the Shabbos limit, the Shabbos boundary. And Shmuel spoke here in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi that when a homeowner gives permission to store something in his yard, the object is not in his jurisdiction, unless he explicitly takes on the liability. And if he doesn't, then the object is not in his jurisdiction, whether with regard to monetary responsibility for that object, produce or an ox, or with regard to the Shabbos limit of that object. Now, the Gemara is going to reject this comparison. Rav could have said to you, listen, the law of monetary responsibility for something deposited in someone's yard is not the same as the law of establishing a Shabbos boundary for how far it can travel on a festival. They're not the same. Rav could have said to you, I said my statement in this case, even in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. For Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi stated his law, his halacha, only there that an object brought into a courtyard is not considered in the possession of the homeowner with regard to monetary responsibility, because In the ordinary situation, one who allows someone to bring items into his courtyard does not accept upon himself the responsibility of watching over them and making sure nothing happens to them. I let you put it in my yard. I do not necessarily accept the responsibility of being, monetarily liable for them. But here, in the case that the homeowner, but here, where you deposited some stuff in my yard, the homeowner has accepted upon himself the responsibility of watching the produce. And consequently, it is as his feet. So, I don't know. So he's distinguishing between produce stored there for safekeeping versus produce stored here for the festival, where we know that it might need to be moved on the festival for the needs of the festival. And similarly, Shmuel could have said, I said my statement here, even in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, as the rabbis stated their opinion only there, maintaining that the objects are considered in the jurisdiction of the homeowner, because it is a person's, i.e. the owner's preference, that his ox or other object be established in the jurisdiction of the owner of the courtyard, so that if his ox does damage to the homeowner's property, the owner of the ox will not be liable. But here, in the case of the festival and the produce deposited there for the festival, is it a person's preference for his produce to be in another's jurisdiction with regard to the establishment of its Shabbos limit? It is certainly inconvenient for him to have his produce outside of his Shabbos limit. Consequently, the two disputes between Rav and Shmuel are not necessarily connected. In other words, it's a little bit confusing, but the main idea is the law of monetary responsibility and jurisdiction over an object that's deposited for safekeeping is not necessarily the same law that we should be applying over produce stored in somebody's property and whether it's going to be able to be used and where it's going to be able to be used during a festival. Now, the Gemara asked concerning Rav's opinion. We learned in the Mishna, however, if the owner placed an eruv, the legal status of his produce is like his status. And if you say that deposited produce is as the feet of the one with whom they are deposited, even if the owner of the produce placed an eruv, what of it? The produce is under the jurisdiction of the people in the other town with whom it was deposited. It should be as their feet and not as the feet of the owner. And Rav Huna said that the sages of the school of Rav said in reply to this question, the Mishnah is dealing with a case where the keeper designated a corner of his house for the owner, thereby revealing his intention that the produce not be considered in his own jurisdiction, but rather in that of the owner, and consequently remains as the feet of the owner. In other words, if I said to you, okay, my yard is safer than yours, you feel safer if you put some stuff in my yard, so I say to you, okay, put it in that corner of the yard. That corner of the yard is for you to put stuff there. If I say that, then the sages are saying, well, I designated that corner for you, meaning I'm not taking responsibility for what's stored in my yard. I'm not legally liable for it. I'm just giving you a place where you can put some stuff and then you come and put it there and you come and take it. And if it gets damaged while it's there, not my problem, your problem. And in that case, it certainly makes sense that the produce stored in that corner that it was designated for him is going to have the same Shabbos boundaries as the owner, no matter where he lives, even though he's far away. We skip a couple of paragraphs. The Gemara relates, Rav Huna bar Chanilai once hung meat on the bar of the door of his host's house that was located outside his own town. And he subsequently wondered if he was permitted to take the meat home with him, since he had made an eruv, enabling him to walk from his home to his host's home, right? So Rav Hana bar Chanilai lives here, and he hung some meat on the bar of the door, whatever that means, over here. And he's going to go and have lunch with this guy in the festival. So he made an eruv so that he would be able to walk all the way there. And now his house and his host's house and the place where he stored some meat before the festival are all within the Shabbos boundary that he established by depositing an eruv in the middle here before the festival. So the question is, since he deposited that meat there before the festival began, can he bring the meat home with him during the festival? Sounds like Yeah, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He should be able to bring the meat home. Why wouldn't he be able to bring the meat home? He came before Rav Huna. So Rav Chana bar Chanilai came before Rav Huna to ask his opinion. And Rav Huna said to him, if you yourself hung the meat, go and take it. But if your hosts hung it for you, you may not take it. What difference does it make if his hosts hung the meat for him? Seemingly, if they hung the meat for him, it was like they were taking responsibility for the meat here, right? And what is their, they didn't make an Erev, so their Shabbos boundary, right, is a circle with the center is this house. And so if that meat that they hung on the door has the same boundary as they do, then Rav Hanilai is not going to be able to get it all the way back to his house, right? Because that would be their boundary and the meat would be on their house and he wouldn't be able to get it all the way back there. The Gemara questions this outcome. And if he himself hung the meat, may he indeed take it? But wasn't Rav Huna a student of Rav? And Rav said that when an object is deposited in one's house, it is as the feet of the one with whom it was deposited, which in this case is the host, the guy who Rav Hanilai is going to go visit and have lunch at his house. And the Gemara responds, here it is different. As Rav Hana bar Hanilai hung the meat on the bar of the host's door, and the case is considered similar to a case of one who designated a corner for him. He hung it on the door, so they said to him, okay, you can hang it on our door, but we're not responsible for it. You are, and that's why it stays in his possession, and that's why it's going to have whatever is his boundaries. His meat will have the same boundaries. Even though it's on the host's door, he hung it there, so it's still in his responsibility, his care. The Gemara raises a further objection with regard to this incident. Rav Hillel said to Rav Ashi, and if they hung the meat for him, may he indeed not take it? But didn't Shmuel say, an ox of a fattener who fattens oxen in order to sell them for meat is as the feet of all people, i.e. it is as the feet of whoever buys it on the festival. So this ox fattener, he's somebody who's fattening an ox to get it ready to be used on a festival. And as we saw earlier in this tractate, can you sell an ox during a festival? Can you do that? Yes and no. You can't have a commercial transaction during the festival, right? And you can't agree on a price, and you can't weigh the ox, and you can't measure. But if you have a relationship with this person and he trusts you, he's just going to let you take the ox, and you're going to, before you take it, you're going to say, well, this ox is the same size as that ox. After the festival, we'll weigh the ox that is going to stay in your possession, and then I'll pay you, right? And right now I'm just taking this one. So you could do that, right? So that ox of the fattener, it started the festival in the possession of the guy who fattens oxen. So it should have the same boundaries as he does. But because he's known to be a guy who fattens oxen and has them available for people to take during the festival, it's going to be as the feet of everyone in the town. So, it's going to be kind of like a communal situation because they didn't know who was going to buy it before the festival began. It's going to be as the feet of everyone in the town. No, I'm sorry. It is as the feet of all people. In other words, it is as the feet of whoever buys it, right? It's like the one who draws water from a public cistern during the festival. Whoever ends up buying it, it's like retroactively designated that it was his oxen as if it was his from when the festival started. The ox that is taken during the festival by this buyer is going to be as his boundary. Okay. This shows that meat that is likely to be sold is not as the feet of its owner, but rather it follows the buyer, as the intention before the festival is that it be for whoever happens to purchase it. Here too, the intention from the outset was that Rav Chana would take it over the course of the festival. So even though the people who live there hung it on their door, it should still have the same boundaries as Rav Chana, because he was planning on taking it. He did take it, and even though they hung it for him, it was like everyone had in mind that he might take it home during the festival. Furthermore, Ravina said to Rav Ashi, Ravina and Rav Ashi are the authors, the editors of the Gemara, the ones who put together the Gemara. They're late Amoraim. And if the hosts hung the meat for him, may he indeed not take it? But didn't Rabba Bar Chana say that Rabbi Yochanan says the halacha, the law, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Dosa, that in a town that has only one shepherd, an animal that will be given to that shepherd over the course of the festival is as the feet of the shepherd, since it is certain that the animal will be transferred to him. Here too, since the meat was put aside for Rav Chana, he should be permitted to take it with him, even if the people who live there hung it. And there was a further difficulty. Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana, and if they hung the meat for him, may he indeed not take it? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah, the status of animals and vessels is as the feet of their owner, and the same should apply to meat that was hung for him. It should be as his feet. Because of all these questions, the Gemara reinterprets the case of Rav Chana. Rather, the problem with the meat concerns a completely different matter than Shabbos boundaries. That's not why when Rav Chana originally came before Rav Huna to answer, can I take this home with me? And Rav Huna said, if you hung it on the door, you can take it. If somebody else hung it on the door, you cannot take it. The issue isn't who hung it on the door and whether it requires a different Shabbos boundary, if he hung it or if they hung it. Rather, the issue is the prohibition against eating meat that has been left unobserved due to the concern that it might have been exchanged for prohibited meat. Rav Chana Bar Chanilai is different from the average person, as he is a great man, meaning a great sage, and he's occupied with his Torah studies. And this is what Rav Huna said to him. If you yourself hung it, in which case you noticed some recognizable mark on the meat and your attention was not diverted from it, then the meat is not forbidden for having been left unobserved, and therefore you may go and take it. However, if the hosts hung it for you, you thereby diverted your attention from it, and they did not pay careful attention to it after hanging it on your behalf. And in that case, it is considered meat that has been left unobserved, and you may therefore not take it. We can't be sure that it wasn't exchanged for unkosher meat, or meat that wasn't shechted properly, or meat that was impure for some reason, not available for Rav Hana. We can't be sure about the provenance of that meat with respect to Jewish law, and so it was left unobserved for too long a time. You can't take it, and that's the reason. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. Mishnah number 7. On a festival, one may not water or slaughter desert animals, which graze mainly outside the town, as they are considered muktzah, set aside, not prepared for use on the festival. However, one may water and slaughter domestic animals, and the Mishnah elaborates, these are considered domestic animals, those that sleep in the city at night. Desert animals are those that sleep in the pasture and come into town only rarely. Right? So animals that regularly come in and out of the town, like imagine in an ancient town what this was. The people lived within the city walls where it was safe, and they had, pens for livestock, and they would bring in certain, herds of sheep and goats, etc., and they would sleep within the city walls at night. And then during the day, the shepherd would get up early and he would take them outside the city walls and go to the pasturing ground, and then they would eat, and then they would bring them back at night. But there were other herds that never came inside the city walls. They were just kind of, went from one place to another, one pasturing ground to another, and never came in to the city walls. So they're saying that for the purposes of the festival, animals that come in and out of the city, you have it in mind that you might need one of them, and it's available to be slaughtered on the festival for, the purposes of a festival meal and rejoicing in the festival. But these animals that are kept far away from the town, pasturing far away, maybe your hired shepherd is the one who keeps them out there for you, and you only see them, once a month or once a year when it's time, to sell the animals and bring them to market. You wouldn't have it in your mind that you might be slaughtering one of those animals on the festival. Therefore, since it was out of mind, it's not prepared for use on the festival, and it's considered muktzah, set aside and not available for use during the festival. The Gemara asks, the Mishnah is coming to teach which animals are muktzah and consequently may not be slaughtered and eaten on the festival. Why then do I need the Mishnah to say one may water and slaughter? What does watering have to do with this? We're talking about we can't slaughter them. Why does it matter whether I can give the animals water or not? What does watering have to do with the topic at hand? And the Gemara explains, the Tana of the Mishna is teaching us a practical matter, incidentally, that a person should first water his animal excuse me. So the Tana of the Mishna is teaching us something incidentally, that a person should first water his animal and only afterwards slaughter it, due to the adhesion of the skin to the meat when this is not done. If one first waters the animal, it is easier to skin it after slaughtering it. Just a very practical matter. And so they talk about watering and slaughtering as something that goes together, because if you are going to slaughter the animal, you should give it to drink first. For your own, practical benefit, it will be easier to butcher the animal after you slaughter it. And the sages taught in a Baraisa which are desert animals and which are domestic ones. So desert animals include all those that go out to pasture at Passover time in the spring and graze in the meadows day and night and enter the town again only at the first rainfall at the start of the rainy season in the fall. And these are domestic animals, all that go out in the morning and graze outside the town's boundary, but come and sleep within the boundary at night. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, both these and those are considered domestic animals and may be slaughtered on the festival. Rather, these are desert animals that may not be slaughtered on the festival. All those that go out and graze in the meadows and do not enter the settled area, neither in the summer nor in the rainy season. Right? So the Mishna said, if they go out in the morning and come back at night, they're domestic. Otherwise, they're desert animals and they're muktzah. Now the Gemara is going to be more lenient. It's going to say, well, actually, which are the desert ones? The ones that go out in the spring and come back in the fall. But, if they go out if they come back to the city more frequently than that, if they go out on Monday and they come back next Monday, then that's considered domestic. And then we get a third definition from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the most lenient one of all. And that's, if they ever come into the town, then they're considered domestic animals and they're prepared for use during the festival. The only ones that are considered desert animals and not available for use during the festival are the ones that never come into town at all. So the Gemara asks concerning Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's opinion, and does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi in general accept the concept of muktzah? Right? Maybe he doesn't hold by set aside at all. He doesn't hold by muktzah. We've seen that some sages don't even hold by muktzah. Like the fact that something could be set aside and therefore you can't touch it. But didn't Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, inquire of his father, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, unripe dates that are placed in a basket to ripen until they are edible? What is the law according to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai? So he asked his father about these unripe, what are they? Figs? Dates. Unripe dates. Right? So they're not ripe yet, and they're going to be put in a basket to ripen. While they're in that basket, are they muktzah? Can I use them? Or have I, by putting them into that place, in that basket, just so that they could keep ripening, does that mean that I never have it in mind to use them, to eat them during a festival until they're fully ripe, and therefore they're muktzah until then? So Rabbi Shimon asked his father, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, what is the law according to the Rashbi, right? Shimon Bar Yochai. Are they considered muktzah or not? So Yehuda Hanasi said to his son, Rabbi Shimon, he said in response, there is no recognition of the law of muktzah according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, except for the case of dried figs and raisins in the midst of the drying process alone. These are fruits that are fit to be eaten fresh and were deliberately removed from use to allow them to undergo a drying process. Figs and grapes, you could eat them when they're fresh. This person wants to turn them into dried figs that could be pressed into cakes, or to turn the grapes into raisins. So when he starts that process, he deliberately removes them from the realm of eating, and they're going to just be out in the realm of drying and being prepared and turned into that food. And now, while they're undergoing that process, It's not in my mind that I would eat them during a festival, and therefore they're muktzah. Unripe dates, however, are not fit to be eaten when they're fresh, and they become fit for eating only when they are ripe. Therefore, if one places unripe dates in a basket to ripen, they are never completely removed from his mind, not having been changed from an edible state to an inedible state, right? The grapes that I set out there to become raisins, they were edible when they were grapes. But since I set them out there to become raisins, in my mind, they were edible. Now I'm making them inedible until they're finished with the process of becoming raisins. But these unripe dates were not edible when they were unripe. I'm just waiting for them to become ripe. At some point, they're going to become ripe. I'm not sure when that is, but as soon as they're edible, I intend to eat them. So why would they ever be muktzah? Therefore, if one places unripe dates in a basket to ripen, they're never completely removed from his mind. They haven't been changed from an edible state to an inedible state, and so they remain permitted. If so, why do we talk about this case? Now we're going to come back to the desert animals. If so, desert animals, which are similarly never completely removed from one's mind, like I own them, they're my animals, just because they're being pastured and fed outside the city walls, they never come back inside the city walls. Why would you assume that I would never think that I might need them during the festival, and so therefore I'm going to go get one of my animals as long as I can, stay within the Shabbos boundary, bring it back to the city, slaughter it, and eat it during the festival? Why would it ever be muktzah? If so, desert animals, which are similarly never completely removed from one's mind, should also not be considered muktzah. Why then does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi indicate that they do have the status of muktzah? And I'm almost done, just 2 quick paragraphs, and then we're going to the Hadran, the SIYUM on Tractate Beitzah. The Gemara suggests several resolutions. If you wish, say that these desert animals are also considered similar to dried figs and raisins, as by sending them outside the town, the owner has actively removed them from use. And if you wish, say instead that the fact that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi told his son that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai does not accept the law of muktzah except for the case of dried figs and raisins does not prove anything about his own opinion. He stated this only in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but he himself does not hold accordingly. And if you wish, say a different answer. He himself, like Rabbi Shimon, did not accept the concept of muktzah, and when he spoke in the Baraisa, he was speaking for the sake of argument in accordance with the words of the rabbis who had spoken before him, saying to them, in effect, according to my opinion, there's no law of muktzah. In accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and all the animals may be slaughtered on the festival. But even according to your approach, that there is a halacha of muktzah, agree with me in any event that with regard to a case where they go out and graze on Passover and enter again at the first rainfall, they are still considered domestic animals and they should be permitted. But the rabbi said to him, no, even those are desert animals. What was the law on this? Which animals may be slaughtered on a festival? Animals that go out to graze all day beyond the town boundary, but sleep within it, are considered prepared for use, and they may be taken and slaughtered on a festival. But those that sleep outside the boundary may not be slaughtered if they are brought within it on a festival. They are muktzah because the town inhabitants do not have them in mind. All this applies to animals owned by Jews. But if a Gentile brings his animal to the slaughterhouse to be slaughtered, it is prohibited only if it is clear that it slept outside the boundary. If the Gentile brings it without specifying, and the majority of the town's inhabitants are not Jewish, slaughtering it is permitted in all cases, as preparation is not required for the animal of a Gentile. In other words, it didn't have a Shabbos boundary when it began because it belonged to a non-Jew. And so it's going to acquire that Shabbos boundary, and it's going to be available for slaughter at the time that it becomes fit to be slaughtered, when the decision is made to slaughter it and to have it during the festival. And finally, with regard to muktzah on Shabbos and festivals, the law, the halacha, although Amoraim as well as major halachic authorities debate this issue, the accepted conclusion is that the law follows Rabbi Shimon with regard to Shabbos, and therefore Most of the halachas of muktzah do not apply. Consequently, anything edible and detached from the ground, including wheat sown in the ground that has yet to take root, or an egg lying under a chicken, may be handled. Similarly, one may handle dates placed in a basket to ripen, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Only items such as dried figs and raisins, which have been actively removed from their edible state, are considered muktzah, as even Rabbi Shimon agrees in that case. Some say that the requirement of preparation does not apply to items in the possession of a Gentile, and therefore even dried figs and raisins held by the Gentiles are permitted on the festival. With regard to festivals, however, the law follows Rabbi Yehuda, and on a festival one may not handle anything that is set aside due to a prohibition or because it lacks preparation. So it's interesting, here the law can sometimes be more lenient on Shabbos because the law with respect to Shabbos follows Rabbi Shimon, who doesn't hold by muktzah in most cases. But the laws of festivals is by Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is more stringent with respect to muktzah. So if you have one of these questions, ideally, before the festival starts, have in mind whatever you might need during the festival so that you won't have to have this issue come up during the festival. That concludes our journey through Tractate Beitzah. So right away, we say the Hadron. We shall return to you, Tractate Beitzah, and your glory is upon us. Our thoughts are upon you, Tractate Beitzah, and your thoughts are upon us. We will not be forgotten from you, Tractate Beitzah, and you will not be forgotten from us, neither in this world nor in the world to come. May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that your Torah will be our avocation in this world and will accompany us in the world to come. Chanina bar Papa, Rame bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rakshish bar Papa. These are all the sons of Rav Papa who are remembered every time we make a siyum on a tractate of Talmud, because that family was such a family invested in Torah scholarship through the generations. Rakish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Please, Lord our God, have a seat. Please, Lord our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people, the house of Israel, so that we, our descendants, and their descendants, and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, may all know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Your commandments make me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. Let my heart be undivided in your statutes, in order that I may not be put to shame. I will never forget your precepts, for with them you have quickened me. Blessed are you, O Lord. Teach me your statutes. Amen, 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 Selah, forever. We give thanks before you, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that you have placed our lot among those who sit in the study hall, and that you have not given us our portion among those who sit idly on street corners. We rise early and they rise early. We rise early to pursue matters of Torah, and they rise early to pursue frivolous matters. We toil and they toil. We toil and receive a reward, and they toil and do not receive a reward. We run and they run. We run to the life of the world to come, and they run to the pit of destruction. As it is stated, but you, God, will bring them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and deceit shall not live out half their days, but as for me, I will trust in you. And finally, the last paragraph, may it be your will, Lord my God, just as you have assisted me in completing Tractate Beitzah, so assist me to begin other tractates and books and conclude them, to learn and to teach, to observe and to perform, and to fulfill all the teachings of your Torah with love. And may the merit of all the Tanaim and the Moraim and Torah scholars stand for me and my descendants, so that the Torah will not move from my mouth and from the mouths of my descendants and the descendants of my descendants forever. And may the verse, when you walk, it shall lead you. When you lie down, it shall watch over you. And when you awaken, it shall talk with you. May that be fulfilled in me. For in the Torah, your days shall be multiplied, and the years of your life shall be increased. Length of days is in her right hand. In her left are riches and honor. May the Lord give strength to his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. Amen. Welcome and Mazel Tov.
Mazel tov, everybody. How exciting is this? We finished another tractate. What number is this? How many have we finished?
That was the 8th, and we will immediately begin the 9th tractate, Rosh Hashanah, just by saying the first line of it, because as soon as we finish a tractate, we always want to begin the next one immediately, because that's how we roll. Okay, Rosh Hashanah, which will really be beginning tomorrow, but just to open it, there are 4 days in the year that serve as the new year, each for a different purpose. On the 1st of Nisan is the new year, the Rosh Hashanah for kings. And it is for this date that the years of a king's rule are counted. And the 1st of Nisan is also the new year for the order of the festivals, as it determines which is considered the first festival of the year and which is the last. On the 1st of Elul is the new year for animal tithes. And on the 1st of Tishrei is the new year for counting years, i.e. Rosh Hashanah, the way that we understand it. We will continue Tractate Rosh Hashanah tomorrow. Now
it's time for the party. That's what I showed up for.
Now it's time to make a l'chaim and to make a bracha over a mizonos.
So, in keeping with the theme of this tractate that we just finished, Beitzah, we've got some egg salad here. And some crackers. And some crackers
made of wheat, right? So we'll be making a mizonos bracha, a blessing over the wheat product. And bourbon is a wheat product also.
But brought out the good stuff.
For that we say a shahakal. So we'll pour it, and then we'll each say the blessing over any liquid, over booze. Then we'll taste some. Then we'll say wish you all l'chaim and take a proper drink. And then we'll make a blessing over the cracker, and then we'll just look at questions, comments, and enjoy ourselves.
Sounds like a plan.
That is for you. That is for me. If anybody's familiar with this iconic
Sal's
bottle,
favorite. Yeah.
This is Blanton's bourbon.
If anybody ever wants to do anything special for Sal, he loves this. It's hard to find in LA.
Hard to find in LA. There is very limited amounts of Blantons in LA. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shak kol nehi b'divaro. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, by whose word everything comes into being.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shak kol nehi b'divaro.
Amen. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim, my friends, our friends.
L'chaim. And may we all be blessed to begin and complete many more tractates together.
Amen. Let us know what you guys are doing your little your little siyum on.
Yeah.
Beverages.
Are you having a beverage? Are you having a snack? That's for you. All right. That's for me. And so for this we say mizonos. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei mizonos.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei mizonos.
Amen. Now we have chewy crackers in our mouth with egg salad. The one thing you don't do is eat on camera. So we'll finish that after we sign off. All right. Did you pass any questions into the question document?
There was a couple questions, yeah.
Okay. And then we'll scan the comments since you're here. So it always takes a moment to refresh. Yosef, my last question for this tractate. Do the sages of the Talmud universally adhere to a uniform set of rules for interpreting the Hebrew Bible, or do they tend to differ with that as well at times? Yeah, well, they definitely differ, right? So there are, they have these rules of interpretation that are mostly codified by Rabbi Yishmael, the 13 hermeneutic principles of how we can derive laws from the Torah. But there's other lists. And as we've seen, they disagree all over the place about, even if they have the same principle, how it's going to be applied, or whether a principle should be applied in a situation or not. So while they generally agree, that if we have a word in the Torah and we're not sure what it means because it's open to interpretation, but that same word is used in another verse, so now maybe these two verses are linked in some way, and we should look at an analogy between the verses and learn out from that. Or if, a kal v'chomer, like in the strict case, this is allowed, then in a lenient case, it's certainly allowed. That kind of reasoning, that gets applied all over the place. But should it be applied or not in a particular situation? And that's why we make this careful and methodic journey through the Talmud and learn what those principles are and see how, there's going to be disputes about them, up and down. Even when, the Tanaim sort of worked it out, the rabbis of the Mishna, one was the holdout, but the majority overruled him. But then in a later generation, they still had that dispute, and the debate was still going on. But generally speaking, even though they might disagree, they're going to agree that the people need to know what law to follow. And so generally they will take a vote at some point, or for some other reason, maybe the law changed, but there has to be an established halacha so people know what to do. And still today, different communities are going to have different practices. So, that's why you have to check with your rabbi when you have an open question. Renee, from where on or in the dwelling do we measure? Isn't my land also my dwelling, or is it really just my house? Yeah, I mean, that was in Tractate Erev, and I don't remember. I don't remember exactly, right? Imagine you're on a ranch in Texas, right? You have a lot of land, way more than 2,000 cubits in every direction. So can you carry everywhere throughout your property? Or is your carrying limit on Shabbos, it starts at your front door? I mean, that's a really good question. It's very relevant in cases like that. And as we saw, we don't get a universal answer to that because it also depends on how your property was fenced in, what goes in, what goes out. Did you intend that fence to act as an Erev or not? So it's not a simple answer. Any thoughts, Nina, as we leave Tractate Beitzah? Nina never intended to study Daf Yomi because she's monitoring the comments all day. She's been learning it. You're becoming quite the Talmudist. You are. You know a lot. More than you give yourself credit for.
Possible.
Yosef, I'm impressed that Sal could answer this so well after that shot of bourbon. L'chaim. And Renee, out here in the woods of Indiana, it's a question. Definitely a question.
What's Sharon doing?
Lavi espresso liqueur from Israel.
That sounds good.
Called A Little Bit More Than Love. Who knew? And Nanamim chocolate wafer cookie, also from Israel. L'chaim. Oh, that's what she's having.
Yeah.
Espresso liqueur and chocolate wafer cookie. I like that. I like that. Folks, we totally agree with this idea. Whenever possible, buy products from Israel. Support the people of Israel. It's a little country with a lot of pressure on it. And it's great, not only to support the people of Israel by buying their products, but it's so nice. Like, whenever possible, we have a wine for Kiddush on Friday nights that's an Israeli wine. Because it's nice, that those grapes and that wine was made in the Holy Land. It's so great. It ties you to the Holy Land a little bit more when you make a blessing on it. PK, seeing Nina with Sal makes us happy. Thank you for these wonderful classes.
Thank you for being here, PK. Peggy.
Great to have you all. Okay.
So we're getting into Rosh Hashanah. I feel like we just got out of Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, right.
Moving past the holiday season.
Right, we didn't have that perfect coincidence where we were studying the laws of Rosh Hashanah right before Rosh Hashanah, the way we were studying Yom Kippur pretty much, and Sukkot especially, right up until right before Sukkot. But whatever, now we'll study Rosh Hashanah and we'll be prepared when Rosh Hashanah comes next year. How many pages are there in Tractate Rosh Hashanah?
Seems like it would be a long one, no? Or is there
You'd
one
think.
or two of them?
No. In fact,
one.
it's in a joint book with Beitzah.
Oh.
So Beitzah had 40 pages. Rosh Hashanah has 35. Rosh Hashanah has 35. I guess it makes sense because the laws of all festivals versus Rosh Hashanah, which is really just one of them. Right? So starting tomorrow, we will be in Tractate Rosh Hashanah. We start on page 2. All tractates start on page 2, and then we'll be there until page 35. So about a month, a little bit over a month, we'll be covering Tractate Rosh Hashanah, the 9th volume of the Talmud, starting tomorrow.
So what little emoji are you going to use? You use an egg, obviously, for Beitzah.
What do you think? I have a plan. What do you think I'm going to do?
An apple?
Nope.
I don't think you're able to get a shofar emoji.
There's no shofar emoji. Not an apple, but...
Pomegranate?
No.
Oh.
On Rosh Hashanah, we have apples and...
Oh, honey.
Honey. There's a honey pot. There's a honey pot emoji. Okay. So starting tomorrow, you'll see the honey pot emoji with God's help.
That makes sense.
Okay, my friends, that's what we've got today. This was a siyum on Tractate Beitzah. Mazel tov to all of us for completing this tractate. Maybe we merit to complete many more. We started on January 5th, 2020. We're on October 10th, 2021. Right? So it's been a year and 10 months. Almost 10 months, right? January will be 2 years, and then we'll be almost a third, less than a third of our 7.5 year journey, right? This is a 7.5 year journey.
7.5 years is a long time.
It's a long time. It's a long time. So, we're more than 1.5 of 7.5. So we're better than 20%. We've done more than 20% of our 7.5 year journey. All right, my friends, a good vach to you, a shavua tov, a good week. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Monday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time. Good night.